Welcome to the Intentional Leader Podcast presented by Reenergize Professional Coaching. We appreciate you listening in and learning with us. The stories and leadership tips you hear will help you become a great leader. Listen intentionally. Now, to our host, Sean Olson.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the latest episode of the Intentional Leader Podcast. This is the podcast where you hear the real stories of people just like you who have become extraordinary leaders. You'll learn some valuable lessons from their lives, lessons you can apply to become the best leader you were created to be. When you become an intentional leader, lives are changed. I'm your host, Sean Olson. I'm an executive coach, business owner, author, and speaker. Thank you for joining us for today's episode of the Intentional Leader Podcast. I'm excited to introduce our guest today. Her name is Leanne Linsky. She is from out in the great Pacific Northwest of the United States. Leanne is the founder CEO of Plauzzable, an online comedy platform. Leanne, welcome to the Intentional Leader Podcast.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Great to have you today. So we were talking here before we hit record, and you're getting ready to jump on a water taxi after we're done today. That's fun. We don't get to do that very often in the Midwest.
I know. Any day I can take a boat to a meeting or, it's like, what is my life? This is amazing. It feels like I'm on vacation.
Exactly. That's fantastic. Well, we're glad to have you here today. And, Leanne, we talked ahead of time. We start every episode of the Intentional Leader Podcast with the same open-ended question. We just want you to kind of walk us through your professional career, but more than that, just leadership lessons learned along the way that's allowed you to do what you're doing today. So tell us about Leanne and tell us about your journey.
Sure. So let's see. I'm originally from the Midwest. So like you, I'm from Illinois, outside of the Chicago area. Grew up in a very funny family. Everybody had a great sense of humor, but I never knew I'd have anything to do with comedy. I ended up going to school for business and got a business degree because I figured no matter what I do in life, I'll be working for some sort of business. So that seems applicable and it gives me a lot of freedom. So I went to community college for my first 2 years and then graduated, and I transferred to University of Nevada, Las Vegas. So I got to move to Las Vegas, and what a great place to be in your early 20s, right? So I graduated from UNLV and got a job doing accounts payable for a home builder. And then a year later, went to another home builder, a Fortune 500 company, also that was moving into the Las Vegas market. And I ended up staying with them for like 13 years. And it was incredible. And I think, when it comes to leadership, I really hit the jackpot because
that's good.
Yeah, it was one of the best work experiences. I can easily say it is the best work experience I've ever had in my life. And I'm still friends with everybody there to this day. I mean, we were good friends. I think sometimes when we talk about, calling it, my work family, that term is often overused nowadays or in such a way. Mm-hmm. But I am so close to these people to this day. I mean, we've been to each other's weddings and funerals and births of children. We've all gone through these major life milestones together. And there's just this really cool bond that I haven't found anywhere else. But one of the biggest lessons that I learned there about how to show up in general is like who you are when nobody's watching. Don't be above we was a construction company. So, we're like, don't be above the shovel or don't be above the broom. If you see something that needs to be done or garbage on the job site that needs to be picked up, bend down and pick it up. Like be that person and never be we were not allowed to say it's not my job. And if we didn't know something, it's like, you know what? I don't know, but let me find out. And that to me is something that I didn't experience after I left the company. And I was like, how is it someone can just end the sentence with, I don't know, and then walk away? It's like, but don't you want to find out? Like, how do we grow as people or in our roles if we don't go, that's interesting. I don't know the answer and I'm going to go figure it out. I didn't hear that anywhere else. And I was like scratching my head, like, what? And I think that's one of the most valuable things I learned there is everybody wanted to grow. We knew that we weren't going to get ahead unless we took the initiative on ourselves. It wasn't like, I don't know, no one told me. And that's where it stops. It's like, oh, you know what? I don't know. Maybe somebody else does. And if they don't know, why don't we find out? So if it happens again, I can handle it right away. And our division president there, Steve, was incredible. I mean, talk about a fantastic leader. He always referred to us as a friend. He never said, this is my staffer. I cringe when I hear people say that, or this is my employee. He treated us like humans. He would introduce like, this is Leanne, we work together, or let me introduce like from the runner all the way up to any other VP or fellow president. And that's how he treated people as people. And everybody had input into process improvement. He's like, if you own that process, then I empower you to make it better. And we were rewarded by how we could make our jobs easier and better. And then another lesson that I learned there that I think is so valuable to this day is one was do it right the first time. Like go out of your way to do things right the first time. And then when customer service issues would come up, how would you handle it if this was your mom, your sister, your brother, your dad, providing you like them, of course, making a huge assumption.
Right.
But how would you handle if it were them? And why would you treat our customers any different?
I love that.
It was just one of the best. I look back on, like we all look back on that time. We often talk and reminisce about how do we get so lucky to work with a group of people like that? And obviously, it was a huge company, and we acquired another corporation during the time I was there. And then, obviously, we all know what happened at the home building market in 2008.
Right.
And we saw it coming sooner. And I had this I started out in accounts payable, and then I went to market research. And then from there, I went into the construction field, and I was a construction coordinator. Then I became a back-end superintendent, taking the house from drywall to finish. And then I went into customer service. And then I became an area manager in customer service. And all through that time, they had put me on a camaraderie committee, and there were three of us. And the other two looked at me and they're like, I don't want to do this. And I'm like, I don't want to do this. And I told the president at the time, I go, I don't want to do this. I have other jobs to do. And he goes, I don't care. You're doing it. And it was something I did in addition to any other role that I had. But what that did for me, and I said to him, I go, well, then I want to do it my way. And he's like, whatever. And I went from just hosting and coordinating our quarterly meetings to hosting and coordinating huge events for 500, maybe 1,000 people at different times and it grew and they became really fun and I loved it and we had a ball. But what it did is it put me in a position where I got to know everybody. And so when I left the company, my title was Manager of Cultural Development. And that was back in the early 2000s when we weren't really talking about company culture, but
culture yet.
We focused on, we saw that in our company, we were winning JD Power Awards. And so every year, and especially in our marketplace. And what we found is that if we ranked really high on our employee satisfaction surveys, our customers rated us exactly the same. And there was a positive correlation between those two. And so they're like, this is really important. And when we acquired another company, they had a completely different culture and personality to the company. And that's when when we were going through this process, this role was created. And it was my job to bring these two personalities together. And it was remarkable on the things that came up, the lessons I learned, the leadership, and how there were so many differences and similarities and how two very different facing companies could be so successful, but run so differently. and how to bring those together. But some of the best lessons ever. And then obviously I was laid off in 2006 because I had
Yeah.
this.
Let me hit some
Yeah.
questions on this one real
Hmm.
quick. I have some thoughts on this. So, great lessons learned on that incredible journey. So, obviously, culture comes from the top down, right?
Yep.
You talked about Steve, your divisional
Yeah.
president, and how he kind of drove this culture down. One of the things I loved about your story, though, was you were there 12 or 13 years, right?
Yeah. Nearly 13.
And
Hmm.
you talked about, if I wasn't counting, but 7 or 8 different roles that
Yeah.
you moved through. And I think it's one of the signs of really positive companies and leadership is when people have that mobility, right? Whether it be across, like it's not a promotion, it's just cross into a different function, whatever, and be able to move through those things. But here's my big question, because culture is a huge piece of everything. And you're talking about the relationships, the friendships that still exist with those people today and how they were focused in on those things. How did they get people that fit the culture? Like, how can you hire for that?
Yeah.
Or was it a situation where you'd hire people and some people would be like, this isn't for me. This is too friendly.
Hmm.
It's too, I'm not curious to ask those questions and find out. And so they
Yeah.
left. Just talk for a minute about that aspect of how did you find a fit for the culture? And when you didn't have it, what happened?
Yeah. So people tend, so on the second half of that, people tended to weed themselves out. If they were like, I
Hmm.
don't like all of this, like, oh, we're all friends and we all hang out thing, they tended to leave on their own accord in a good way.
Good.
They're
Yeah.
just like, it's not for me. But we had a lot of longevity in the company, and there are people still there. There are some people still
Wow.
there. And how did we find these people? This is what such a great question. I cannot teach people to care.
Correct.
So finding people who care is huge because I can teach them a job, right?
Hmm.
So how did we recruit? We were not maybe the highest paying company, but we weren't the lowest paying company, right? But we were a fun company, and people were valued. I honestly, I see a lot of talk about culture about there's an app or, we force meetings or gatherings. It was, it is, it has to do with those things, but honestly, those things are just things unless people truly feel that way. And
Hmm.
they have to want it. I mean, I worked for another company and they're like, we're doing trivia night. And everybody would be like, I don't even want to hang out with these people, let alone play trivia with
Yeah.
them, you know?
You can't fake
You
it. You
cannot
can't fake
fake
it.
it. And it honestly has to take part from the top. And if your leadership doesn't want to spend time with the team, then why does anybody else? Like
Hmm.
there wasn't a hierarchy. When we hung out, it wasn't like, oh, I'm the president in the C-suite and then everybody else sits at a different table. No, that's not how it is. There is cross communication at all levels and jokes
Right.
and fun and um silliness, and let it go, show up without having an agenda and just be a real person and talk about movies. They, like, our president Steve used to show up on the job site and take a group of the guys take to movie night, and they just go watch movies or whatever,
Right.
and so we don't, it was just that kind of, we wanted to hang out with each other. So finding people, to your question, what we found is we hired from people we knew. Like, referrals is a big thing because
Yeah.
if people like and get, and they're like, great person, I vouch for this person, like they get it, then great, bring that person on because they're already a fit, and we can,
Hmm.
it, and we really saw, like, when you have the right fit, almost anything is possible. People can really grow because they're
Exactly.
accepted, and there's this profound sense of belonging. And I think that people's needs, like a lot of time, people are motivated by money, of course, especially in a competitive market in certain jobs. But there's also something to be said about a sense of belonging on a team. At the end of the day, if you're coming home miserable, no amount of money is going to make you happy.
Hmm.
And so
I agree.
when you can go to work and feel that your contribution is valued, that people actually like you, you don't have all this other drama happening, that goes a long way. So finding people through your networks of, and people that you know. But
Yeah.
I remember one of our VPs and I don't know, we were all on a company trip and we traveled together. We did all kinds of stuff. Like it was insane. But we were on a company trip and we went into a sandwich shop of all places and we made an order, and the girl behind the counter was so friendly, and the way she asked questions is like, hey, wanted to, check in, like something something, and she asked us a question, and Eric and I looked at each other and we're like, we need to recruit her. This is a person making sandwiches. We're a Fortune 500 company, and we're like,
Yep.
she would be great
Yep.
in our service department because she gets it, the way she treated us from the
Yeah.
minute we walked in the door. And it was just a sandwich, but we felt so good about our decision to
Yeah.
have lunch there. Think about what she could do for someone who just bought a house. So
Kudos for recognizing talent.
yeah.
Yeah.
And I think that's the skill set. Like I can walk into any store or any business today, and if how I'm greeted makes a huge difference in how I feel about
Sure does.
patronizing that business. And sometimes
Yep.
they tell people, greet people when they walk in the door, and you have someone yell, hey, hello, and it's like, ooh, I know
Right.
what you're doing. I've worked retail. But there's a difference when you approach somebody and look them in the eye and say, welcome, my name's
Yep.
Leanne. Let me know how I
Absolutely.
can help you. And I don't care what your title is. This goes again of not being above the broom. If you see that someone hasn't been acknowledged, don't tap someone on the shoulder and say, go acknowledge them. Go acknowledge yourself. Be a leader.
Yep.
Step forward. Set the example.
Absolutely. No, I love that aspect where that organization really helped break down the walls, right? Because
Yeah.
you said not just things that you guys would do outside of the office, and you said titles were irrelevant. It was inside the office too, right?
Yeah.
And so titles are necessary because we have to know the role that we play in the organization.
Yes.
But that's where it stops.
That's it.
It's about our role. It's not about who we are as a person, who we are as humanity, and the fact that we can do this together.
Yep.
So great stories. So in 06, you said you got laid off because they saw things coming in the housing market. Pick up.
Yeah. So at that time, I was manager of culture development. I had a huge annual budget. We had doubled in size. We had been hiring up until around that point. It started slowing down, I think, but we were hiring like 60 people a month. I mean, it was bananas.
My goodness.
I had created this system where we onboarded everybody one day a month, so that like we'd have cohorts, and these people all became really good friends because they all started their first day of work together, and and we'd put them through a 90-day training program. And so anyway, I got laid off. I was shocked. I didn't see it coming, but I guess I could have. Looking back, you're like, oh yeah, I guess I could see that. Like it would make sense. Like if you're going to make cuts and everything. And I was just like, I have no idea what I'm going to do with my life because this is all I've known. I thought I would be here till the end. Honestly, I loved it. And so they gave me time that we didn't announce it right away. And they said, take your time, So I continued to go into work every day. And I put together all the budgets for the following year and set things up and did whatever I could. I honestly didn't know what to do. But during the time that I had worked there, I had done a lot of public speaking. And in 2001, I took my first comedy writing class because I was like, I want to incorporate more humor into what I'm doing. And I want to write like a monologue like Johnny Carson and do it at one of the events I was doing. I was doing a lot of video production, all kinds of creative things at all these events. And I loved it. And then after that, one of the other city presidents approached me and we're chatting in my office. And he's like, have you ever considered taking an improv class or some comedy? And I was like, no. Nice. And he's like, the Second City has a training center out here. And I was like, what? I was like, I didn't know that. And being from the Chicago area, I'm very familiar with the Second City. And absolutely. I was like, I had no idea they had a training center out here. And his wife was an actor in California. And he's like, yeah, you should check it out. And then I was like, yeah. And then I saw an ad in the paper, and then like it came up like several times that week. I'm like, this is weird. So I called, and they're like, yeah, we have classes. Signed up for classes, and I took all of them 2 and 3 times each. every class they offered.
Wow.
For the next 5 years. I was fully into it. I was in an improv group. We did shows, everything on my nights and weekends. Like I was all in. Like that was my life. And anytime I could incorporate humor or what I was learning into what I was doing by day, I did that. Like it was just so
Nice.
cool. And then so here I was laid off, and and during my vacation time, I would travel. I went to New York for 2 weeks and studied at Upright Citizens Brigade, and came back and I was like, New York is like everything. And then I would travel every weekend to LA and take classes in LA after Upright Citizens Brigade opened a training center in LA. And I was like, I was just doing all the things and having a ball. And so then I get laid off. I don't know what I'm going to do. And I had like 5 months notice, like, and then we didn't announce it until like the last 30 days. And like I had a week and a half, I think, left at work.
Mhm.
And I get a phone call from a guy I met at the theater in New York. And he's like, hey, what's going on? I said, I lost my job and I have no idea. And he's like, well, you always said if you didn't have that job and your house, you would move to New York. And I'm like, well, I still have my house. And he's like, but you don't have that job, right? And I was like, no. He goes, well, I'm graduating college. He was younger. He's like, I'm graduating school and I'm going to go spend the summer in New York. Why don't you go? And I was like, okay. He goes, well, I have a sublet. He calls me back like the next day. He's
Nice.
like, I have a sublet. Are you coming? And I was like, well, I got to think about it. He goes, you have 1 hour. And so I went outside the office. I walked around. I went back in. I called and I said, I'm in. And a month later, I packed 2 suitcases. I had put all my stuff in storage, rented out my house, and I moved to New York City. And I
Wow.
fully immersed myself into the comedy scene, taking classes, getting in, ensembles to perform, and did all the things. I went back to Chicago for a month and a half, and I studied at IO Chicago because a company gave me so my going away party, they found out I was going to move to New York because I had just made that decision. They gave me a going away party and they paid for part of my next class at IO Chicago and
Nice.
got me an iPod. It was really like, they're good people. And I'm so fortunate that 1, I left when I did, and 2, that they're all still in my life. And so, yeah, I went and did all the things in New York. I got jobs. I promised myself, a musician I know once, a really successful musician, always said, I never took a job that I would love more than doing music, because I knew if I got a job that I loved too much, I would never fully go in on my music career. And I thought about that when I moved to New York. I'm like, wow, I just
Yeah.
made a big leap. So when I took jobs, I'm like, I'm not going to take a job that I'm going to love more than comedy. And so that's what I did. And I ended up taking some really interesting jobs. And in those roles, I learned so many other things because I wasn't working for a Fortune 500 anymore. But I also wasn't working in a situation where everybody cared about what they do to the level in
Right.
which I was used to. And that just really blew my mind. But a lot of really great lessons.
That's awesome. What I love about the story with the transition into comedy, really starting in 01, but then hyper, come 06, is you totally immerse yourself in it, right?
Yeah.
And you were an adult, you'd been in a career, and it's so amazing how many adults say, I'm too old for that, right? Even if they're in their 30s, they're like, I'm too old to learn something new, or I'm not going to do that. But the best leaders are learners. And when you immerse yourself into something, you go after it, incredible things happen. And so some people could sit back and say, wow, how lucky Leanne is to see where she is today. Maybe you have had some luck on things. We all need people. We all need some opportunities. But I'm a firm believer we create our luck by working hard and by learning and growing. And you did that. You're intentional in it.
Yeah. Well, I sometimes really bad things happen. Like at the time, I look back now and I'm so grateful for being laid off. At the time, I was like, I don't know what to do. I don't know if I laugh. I don't know what I cry. And it seemed so traumatic because that's all I knew. And also during those times in the earlier, like I had gone through a divorce and experienced those things. And those things also catapulted me of like, I'm going to go out there and say yes to things. That's why, I'm going to go all in on my career. I'm going to go take these comedy classes instead of holding myself back. So you're absolutely right. When I was laid off, it was a couple months before my 36th birthday. Mm-hmm. So here it was in, I think it was May 1st. I moved to New York in 2006. And 2 months later, I turned 36. And so there I was. And I'm like with all of these young people right out of college, and I'm like, I've already been married and divorced a couple times. Like I had a 13-year career and we're all, doing this bananas comedy stuff on stage. And it was the best thing I could have done. It was incredible. And I was living in New York. My God, a masterclass in life right there. And I stayed in New York for just about 9 years. And, and I wrote a one-woman show. I hosted and produced a weekly open mic for 7.5 years. I hosted and produced weekly stand-up shows. Like in my last year in New York, I produced 42 stand-up shows that year alone.
My goodness.
I did commercials. I worked with agents. Like I look back, I'm like, at the time, I'm like, I'm not doing anything, Now I look back, I'm like, wow, I was doing a lot. And then I moved to LA, and people are like, oh, Leah, did you move to LA for your comedy? And I guess you could say that. I moved there for a man, and that turned out to be a joke. So here I was at the end of 2014, beginning of 2015. I moved from New York to LA, and I thought, this is it. Like, I was like, this is. Anyway, that just turned out to be like one of the most traumatic decisions of my life. But I decided to stay in LA. I'm like, I'm going to figure this out. And I started producing shows there. I started a podcast. I did like 100 episodes with my now husband. So he's a different guy that I met after I got up on my feet. And we've been together ever since. He's amazing. And but I was like, and he, was a big influence on me too. He's very well educated and everything. And I had always said to myself, when I turn 50, I'm going to consider going back to school and getting a master's degree. No matter what I'm doing in life, I should ask myself that question. Do I want to go back to school? And because at that point, so much in the world has changed. How do I stay relevant? Right. And so my 50th birthday was approaching, and I was like, I think I want to, and before that, when I moved to New York to LA, I'll add this, I found myself spending so much time on the freeway, and I wasn't spending hardly any time on stage. I'm like, this is terrible. Like in New York, I feel very spoiled that I had so many opportunities, and here geographics, forget about it. I mean, I'm going to the grocery store. It takes 3 hours. So how do I fix that problem? And I also really miss the camaraderie and the people I met in New York terribly. I miss them so much. So in 2014, 2015, I'm like, maybe I do things online, and maybe I do it with Skype. Everybody laughs at Skype, right?
Yep, we remember Skype.
But I was also at the time director of marketing for a company in New York. And when I moved to California, they had studios and stuff in LA, and they're like, great, because we had a team in LA. So it worked out great, and I could work remotely, and I was using Zoom, and I was like, well, maybe I'll use Zoom. And then all this life got lifey because, I'm like, I got to find a new place to live. I just got here, all this stuff. So I set that idea aside, but it continued to roll around. And I met my now husband. I was producing shows. I was doing all the things. And then my 50th was approaching, and I still had this idea. And I started doing it before COVID. And I used Zoom. I was doing online open mics. And I was like, I think there's something to this. And how do I scale it? How do I get this thing moving? And in the meantime, while I was doing podcasts, I went back to school and did a couple years of training to be a life coach, because I had spent so many years on the stage talking at people. I wanted to learn how to talk with people, and coaching is incredible training for that. Yep. One of the amazing game changers for me. So anyway, I went back and got my master's of innovation and entrepreneurship at University of California, Irvine during COVID.
Nice.
Yeah. And that's where I could take my idea of doing comedy online and figure out how to build a company and create this product to solve a lot of problems I was having and wanted to solve, but also in the industry, comedians in general, how could I empower them and help unite a fragmented industry? And that's where I came up with Plauzzable.
So that's plausible. So this is like the birth of entrepreneurship, right? We find a problem that exists, and then we say there's got to be a better way. And so, what were some of those? Just quickly, what were some of those problems that comedians were running into that drove you to create Plauzzable as the answer?
Yeah. Well, the first one I already mentioned was I wanted to be able to connect with people that I didn't live near. Right. So I
Hmm.
wanted to reconnect with people on the East Coast. I also didn't want to have to drive forever in order to get 5 minutes to work out some jokes. So that was one. We're always
Right.
looking for stage time. And we don't just write a joke and know that it works. We have to put it up in front of people in real time to know that we
Mm,
get that reaction that we're looking for. And so you can't get that on social media. I mean, you can get likes, but I can like a
right.
zillion things on social media and not really have watched a video. You know what I mean? So, and also
Hmm.
as a comedian, it's not the same as getting immediate laughter. The other thing I noticed is using the problems I was solving is using existing technologies was great to get us through a pandemic and to connect people, but it wasn't created specifically for online entertainment. So there's a bunch of nuanced things that were like would frustrate, especially comedians who are counting on immediate response. Um,
Right.
so how do I fix those problems? But then as I look at comedy in general, most people don't realize that comedians typically don't get paid, and when we do, we don't get paid a lot. So
Mm,
most comedians often pay to play. They have to work for a club. They have to frequent the club every night. They have to like there's a lot of hoops to get through
right.
before you get passed at a club. There's many years that gets involved. And even if you start getting paid, you're only getting paid like maybe sometimes with a burger or a beer or,
Yeah.
$10 or some gas money or some splitting some tips or something like that, but nothing sustainable until you get to a certain level. So I want to solve those problems and basically put control into the hands of the comedians in a way that they don't have now without having to give away everything for free. Like with music, when you write a great song, people want to listen. We want to listen to that song over and over and over again. But when I write
Right.
a good joke, you heard it once. You don't need to hear it three more times. It's like one, and I've kind of burned it now.
Yeah.
So we and not all comedians write really fast. So if I'm putting all my material out for free on social, when you come see me, you're going to be disappointed if you see exactly what you already saw on Instagram. So a lot of people will put their crowd work or something on there. And there's a whole other thing in the industry about is crowd work really comedy? And some people are great at it. They make a living off of it. And other people feel differently. But how do I set this up and give people opportunity? And also 40% of the open mics are located in New York and California. And if you're not in those two big areas,
Right.
what about all the people in the flyover states? Like all the people in between that
Hmm.
are super talented. There may not be that many opportunities for them or people in other countries, for goodness sake, right?
Yeah.
So how do we bring that together? So what I did with Plauzzable is I created a platform where basically you think of it as a two-sided marketplace. You think of like an Etsy, right? You have people who create things and people who buy things. With Plauzzable, it's on one side you have the comedians and on the other side you have the fans. So a comedian can come
Mm,
in. We provide them with the scheduling tools, the virtual stage, ticketing services. They get their whole comedian profile like you do on a LinkedIn. Think of it that way, where you can go in
hmm.
and you can see all of their experience, their bio, their photo, upcoming shows that are happening on Plauzzable. They can even we put a space in there so if they're performing in person, you can see where they're performing in person and have a link to get tickets.
Nice.
So because comedians, they don't have a lot of money and they don't have and not everybody has a website. And boom, you have a web page, right? You have all of these things. They don't have to have out of pocket expenses if they want to produce. They can go on, they can schedule it, in a club, you have to ask for permission. You have to pitch your show. You have to put a deposit down sometimes on the room. You have to guarantee X number of tickets sold, all that stuff. TikTok, Instagram, you have to have a minimum number of followers. YouTube, minimum number of subscribers before you begin making any money. I mean, that's a lot of hoops. Plauzzable.
It is.
Go on, put on your show. You sell one ticket, you're making the majority of that ticket revenue. Done.
Nice.
You have 5 people show up. That you're good. You have 100 people show up. You're good. But putting the empowering people, and that's one of the things I learned at my best job ever is like give people permission to go out and do good things.
Yeah. What I love about that, you solved a lot of problems. It's something you're passionate about. You use modern technologies to get there. But I do like this last piece you're just describing because it's still in the hand of the comedian to see how much they're going to make out of it.
Yeah.
Right? And I don't say make just from a financial basis, just for the reputation and everything else. And really, that's the whole purpose behind being intentional in our leadership and what we do. And you have to be intentional leading yourself first.
Yes.
Right? Plauzzable is an incredible platform, but if I don't use it effectively as a comedian, it's irrelevant.
Right.
You still got to go after it. So Plauzzable has been growing. Your comedian base has been growing. I assume the fan base then of people who. So can I go on to Plauzzable and like search comedians, see all their shows, and just go buy tickets to watch?
Absolutely. So you can create your free fan account, and then you can look through the talent directory. You can sort by types of comedy and see who pops up. That might feel like what. Some people maybe you want to hear all about relationships or dark humor or puns and, wordplay. And maybe other people want more serious topics. You can sort by that. You can go through the all shows listing, like shows you might like, and look, and it's in chronological order, what's happening today versus farther out. There's a lot of free shows on there. There's open mics. Open mics are a space where anybody can show up and ask for time on stage to work out their material.
Wow.
And so anytime you see an open mic, it's not necessarily a show. It's where the community comes together and people are encouraged to work out new things and get feedback and have a good time. And it's just really fun.
Great platform. That is awesome. So glad you've done that. And so it seems like you're kind of in a sweet spot where you take all your experiences and things you've learned and you've put it into Plauzzable and you feel like you're making an impact and having fun and being funny in the process.
Yeah. I'm very, very lucky and grateful for, at the time it seemed like, what am I doing? I'm it doesn't seem like a linear path when you're in it.
Right.
But I can look back now and be like, every failure, every hard time or every challenge, and also all the other successes that I've had along the way add up to something. But I needed a lot of those things to happen in order to grow, in order to be pushed into the right direction.
Yep. I love both those words, grow and push, because that's what it takes. So.
Yeah, sometimes we need a
That's
kick
great,
in the pants.
Leanne. Yeah, we do. Pat on the butt, kick in the butt, pat on the back, whatever it's going to be. So, well, hey, Leanne, we close every episode of the Intentional Leader podcast with the same question. It's just a quick tip thing. What is something our listeners can do today to lead more intentionally and effectively?
I think it goes back to, I don't know, but I'm going to go find out. And I think in leading that, Steve would always say to us, that's a great question. How are you going to fix that? And I think putting it back into the hands of the people on our team and giving them permission to go figure it out. It may not be what I do or the way I would do it, but that's okay. That's how people learn. That's how people grow.
Great tip. I love it. Well, Leanne, thanks so much for being here with us today. Listeners, you'll find all of her connection pieces down in the show notes from today, so you can check out Plauzzable and find her online. Leanne, it's been great to have you. I hope our paths cross again and get out there and keep helping people laugh.
Thank you so much. It's been a really, really great time talking with you this morning. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of the Intentional Leader Podcast presented by Reenergize Professional Coaching. Be sure to see the show notes for links to Reenergize Professional Coaching and links to contact our guests. Now, hit that subscribe button so that you are alerted with every new episode of the Intentional Leader Podcast.